in this village. But there was another source for his safety that, quite unbeknownst to him, he had become a Muslim. And that's because without knowing what it was, he recited the Shahada in Arabic. Because they were telling him what it was. They were just talking to him. He didn't speak Arabic, nor did he speak Urdu or Farsi. And so he accidentally became a Muslim, so they were even more solicitous for his care. So you have the Shahada. And once you become this Muslim, you then have obligations. One is zakat, which is charity. It's obligatory. It's a certain percentage of your income, and that is to go for the general welfare of the community, support of widows, orphans, and so forth. And you are to pray, obligatory 5 times a day, oriented toward Mecca. When Islam began, they were oriented toward Jerusalem because Muhammad still hoped that the Jews would recognize him as a prophet. When they didn't, he switched the orientation to Mecca. So you pray 5 times a day, and then if you can afford it, you have to go on the Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca, once in your life. And that's so notable. If a Muslim does that, he has a surtitle to his name, Haji. So then you're known as Haji Muhammad, or it's a great distinction. And then, of course, you are familiar with Ramadan and the period of fasting that is obligatory to all Muslims. And then there is that 6th pillar, the unspoken pillar, which is jihad, which is obligatory both either individually or collectively for all Muslims. But not any Muslim can declare a jihad. Only the caliph can do that. What about everybody else? We have this problem that as a Muslim, to achieve salam, we have to bring all things to Islam. This bifurcates the world into the Dar al-Islam and the Dar al-Harb. The Dar al-Islam is the house or the abode of Islam, of submission, and everybody else is the Dar al-Harb, the house of war. And again, the means they have at their disposal to overcome that is jihad or dawah. As you know, beginning in the mid-7th century, Islam bursts out of the Arabian Peninsula and conquers huge portions of the world. Now, what are they to make of these people? And how are they to treat them according to their own scripture and sacred law, the Sharia? Well, if you were a pagan, you were an infidel, and you had 2 choices. 1, submit and become a Muslim, or 2, death. That was it. Now, if you were a person of the book, whom the Muslims defined as either Christians or Jews, and when they conquered the Persian Empire, there were so many Persians they couldn't kill them all, so they found that the Zoroastrians had a book, and they included them. People of the book have a 3rd choice. Not just death or becoming a Muslim. They can become a dhimmi. That is, you can acknowledge your inferiority to the Muslims through the payment of what's called a jizya, a poll tax, which is made annually and in such circumstances that it is clear that you are being humiliated in the payment of it. And the purpose of this is so Muslims can see what happens to those who don't believe, and those who don't believe are encouraged to become Muslims. So the dhimmis. Were we in a Muslim country that still ruled according to Sharia, and you chose to remain Christians or Catholics, you would pay the jizya and you would all be dhimmis. Now, what indeed did happen over all the years of Muslim presence, conquest, and occupation? As you probably know, all of the Middle East and North Africa was Christian at the beginning of the 7th century. How Christian? Well, we do know from historical records that in the 6th century, in North Africa alone, there were 700 bishops. 500 years later, in 1070, there were only 2. How do we know that? We know because those 2 remaining bishops petitioned Pope Gregory and said, please send us a 3rd bishop so we can have apostolic succession down here. That gives you, just in a little capsule form, an idea of the magnitude of the transformation that took place once Islam had conquered these formerly Christian places. Now, there are a lot of Islamic doctrines that it might be interesting for you to know that are internal to it. If you become an unbeliever, if you engage in heresy within Islam, which is called bid'ah, innovation. Bid'ah is heresy. I was quite amazed when President Obama spoke in Cairo, and he said, Al-Azhar, I just applaud, this is the center of innovation. I thought, I wonder how they translated that one. So basically, if they did it literally, they'd say, oh, you're wonderful, you're the center of heresy here. And the Lord, bid'ah, innovation, bad. When you have God's direct word and everything is codified by Him, you don't innovate. And if you do, you may become a kufr, which is an unbeliever. And if you become a kufr, guess what happens to you? Death. In all 4 Sunni legal schools, death is mandatory for an apostate. Do you remember that great movie with Sean Connery, The Man Who Would Be King? Remember where they were going? Kafiristan. That was the part of Afghanistan that was the last to convert or be forced to convert to Islam. So it was known as Kafiristan, the place of the unbelievers, the Kufrs. When in the late 19th century they forced it to convert, it was changed to Nuristan, land of light, once they're all Muslims. By the way, now, we find that rather hard to believe that you would be executed if you changed your faith. Why is that? Because we have something called freedom of conscience, right? Well, there was no word in Arabic for conscience. So you might understand you can't have freedom of something that you don't even have a word for. And I'll show you why that is so as we now move into the actual content of Muslim revelation. Now, for those of you who have read the Quran, you, I'm sure, were startled by this when you encountered it. It certainly got my attention. And that first thing is, in their creation account, as contrasted with Genesis, man is not made in the image and likeness of God. And to suggest that he is, in Islam, is a grave sin. In Genesis, it's very clear that God creates man in his image and likeness. And this suffuses all of our scripture and indeed our culture to the point that my reminding you of this may be a bit of a yawn. But let's recall for just a moment this lovely statement from the Book of Wisdom. Quote, "For God formed me to be imperishable, the image of his own nature he made me." The image of his own nature he made me. And then, of course, in the New Testament, St. John makes the extraordinary statement, now we are children of God. We have a familial relationship with God. As you know from the Our Father, Christ spoke Aramaic, Abba. Abba more literally translates as daddy. So you'd say, our daddy who art in heaven. Can you imagine?